Hello there, I'm Lady Loy, and you can find me on the Roller Coaster Show every Saturday, 7 till 9, and that's on Gold Standard Radio. And you can also find me on Lovers Rock Radio for nostalgic vibes on a Friday, 7 till 9, on Lovers Rock Radio. So I wanted to talk about this rumour that's going around about a curfew in Brent that clubs should close at 2:30. So I've done my research and I want to share with you what I found. I've called it Raves Are Not Just Raves for Black People. Is there really a curfew at 2:30 a.m. in Brent? Lately there's been a story circulating quietly but insistently that nightclubs in Brent now have to close at 2:30 in the morning because violence that supposedly erupts when the door shuts. It's one of those stories that sounds plausible enough to travel quickly, especially in a city like London, where pressure, policing and nightlife are always in tension. But the more I listened, the more something didn't sit right with me. So I decided to look into it, not emotionally, not defensively, just factually. And what I found was silence. No public police statements, no Brent Council licensing papers citing a pattern of post-closure violence, no local reporting of repeated incidents tied specifically to clubs closing late in Brent, no evidence trail that would normally exist if a whole borough had quietly imposed a blanket curfew. Because that's the thing people don't realise. In this country, councils and police don't just decide these things informally. If there were a real surge in violence, serious enough to justify shutting down nightclubs across an entire area, or even closing them early, there would be records. There would be hearings. There would be headlines, but there aren't. Which brings us to the rumour itself and why it matters. For many people, a nightclub closing early isn't just an inconvenience. For others, it's the loss of something much deeper. Sorry about that. For many people, a nightclub closing early is just an inconvenience. For others, it's the loss of something much deeper. Late night into early morning dances aren't just entertainment in the Caribbean culture, they are inheritance. They're how joy survived when very little else was allowed to. There were generations learned how to breathe together, to release together, to remember themselves in a world that often demanded that they shrink. When a good DJ plays, really plays, and the room is ram-packed, bodies pressed close, sweat in the air, bass moving through the floor, what you're witnessing isn't excess, it's regulation. It's people exhaling in a city that rarely gives them permission to do so. And that's why people don't drift away at 1 in the morning. That's why they stay. That's why they don't want the night to end just as the music reaches its peak. So when a story circulates suggesting that these nights are being cut short because they somehow invite violence, it does more than change closing times. It quietly reframes culture as risk. It suggests that joy, when expressed this way, must be contained. That's why I went looking into the evidence. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes what's presented as police or council rule is actually a business owner's decision. Club owners face rising costs, security, insurance, staffing, licensing fees, transport logistics, and late night operations are expensive. In a tight economic climate, shortening hours can be a survival strategy. But saying we can't make it work financially is harder than saying the police won't allow it. One sounds vulnerable, the other sounds final. Over time, the explanation hardens into fact. It gets repeated. It becomes what everybody knows. And before long, a rumour takes on the authority of law. The danger is that when violence is used as the justification without evidence, it reinforces old assumptions. That certain music attracts trouble. that certain crowds need tighter control, that certain kinds of joy must be supervised more closely than others. And it does this without ever having to prove anything at all. Let me be clear. Violence does happen in nightlife. It happens across genres, across boroughs, across demographics. But isolated incidents are not the same as patterns, and patterns are not the same as policy. In Brent, there is no public record showing a consistent wave of violence after clubs close that would warrant a borough-wide curfew. None. And that matters because policy built on perception rather than proof has consequences. It shapes who gets space and who doesn't, who is trusted and who is quietly restricted. And it does so while sounding reasonable, even responsible. What makes this especially painful is that Caribbean nights are often some of the most intergenerational spaces left in the city. You'll see elders, young people, parents, professionals, all sharing the same rhythm. That kind of communal space is rare, and once it's lost, it's very hard to get back. So this isn't about denying that safety matters. Of course it does. It's about asking for honesty. If a venue chooses to close earlier for business reasons, say that. If licensing conditions change for a specific club, explain why. But don't allow an unproven narrative of violence to stand in for evidence, because that narrative doesn't land neutrally. It lands on bodies that have already been over-policed, over-scrutinised and misunderstood. We owe ourselves better than rumours. We owe our culture better than implication. And we owe our communities the dignity of truth. So I would be asking club owners for proof that the police, Brent, have stipulated this curfew. And if they can't give you any proof, they need to compensate you if they want to close their club early. That's just my opinion. Not the opinion of Lovers Rock Radio, not the opinion of Gold Standard Radio, Lady Loy's opinion. Because when the music plays into the early hours and the crowds move as one, what you're seeing isn't disorder. It's people remembering themselves, and that's not something to be closed down quietly, without explanation. That's something worth protecting, honestly, transparently, and with all the facts in full view. Now, I just want to share with you quickly Brent Pacific licensing activity in a nutshell. I was not able to find any credible sources, news articles, council press releases, official statements showing that Brent Council and the police have imposed a new curfew that all venues must shut by 2:30. There's no official published policy that universally restricts London nightclubs to 2:30 a.m. reported in the last few months. Now, Recanto Kings in Willesden. These are individual licensing disputes where police and residents object to certain venues wanting to stay open late. So with Recanto Kings, which is a local bar in Willesden, that's Brent, they applied to extend an alcohol and entertainment hours to 2:30 on weekends. Metropolitan Police objected strongly, saying later hours would increase violence, antisocial behaviour and drug use, and argued against the extension beyond 2:30. This isn't a universal curfew, it's a specific instance where the police opposed longer hours at a particular venue. And then we have the temporary events notices. Some venues apply to run late nights via a temporary event notice. Police and councils can oppose them on the grounds of crime nuisance. Brent Council has dealt with these on a case-by-case basis rather than imposing blanket late-night restrictions. So I do hope this is useful for anybody who has been told that, especially over Christmas, they have to finish the event at 2:30 because of police and violence. You know it's not true, and you need them to be accountable and to tell you the truth, what's going on. And that's all I've got to say for now. If you can, check me out later. It's Friday night, and so I'm on Lovers Rock Radio. And if you miss it, check me out on Mixcloud. And that's all I've got to say for now. You take care now. Bye-bye.